Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes. Today I'm joined by Josiah Dykstra and Helen Patton. They're authors of Switching to Cyber, the Mid-Career Guide to Launching a Cybersecurity Career. And honestly, I followed both these folks for several years. I've actually never talked to them live, but I followed them each in their own respective careers, for quite a while. Helen with OSU, and then Josiah through some publications and research and academic stuff that he would publish with folks like Kelly Shortridge and others. But for folks that don't know you guys, don't know your background, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Maybe start with you, Helen.
Sure. So, Chris, thanks for having me on. I've been doing the cyber thing for longer than I'm willing to admit. And I'm one of those weirdos that jumps from multiple industries to multiple industries. So I spent about a decade at JP Morgan doing the Wall Street finance thing. I was 8 years the CISO at Ohio State University doing the higher ed public sector thing. And now I'm 5 years at Cisco, where I've had 3 roles in the 5 years. Currently, I'm a cybersecurity advisor for our state, local, public sector organization here in the United States. And I occasionally dabble in some work in Australia as well. So there's that.
And I probably have a pretty traditional career path in that I got a bachelor's in computer science, did a master's right away. And then I went to the government. I went to the National Security Agency for about 19 years and did a whole bunch of fun, cool things. Later got a PhD and have done a lot of research and papers and books like this because I like to share that information. I have a consulting company and I also work for a defense contractor now.
So you're pretty, you don't got a lot going on. You're pretty real low key over there.
Busy, fun and busy both.
Yeah. So I was asking Josiah this off air before we jumped on here, but you guys know this, and Helen has written a book, if I'm not mistaken, on this before, but we see so much content of people coming into the cyber career field new career entrants that are just kind of new to the professional workforce in general, right? And maybe fresh graduates or looking at boot camps and those kind of things. I haven't seen them much in terms of kind of mid-career folks, right? Kind of folks coming in through the side door. They're already professionals. They're already in the workforce. They have competencies and expertise in other domains, but now they're looking at cyber. What made you all feel this was the right time and it kind of come from this area, this angle of the topic? And are you seeing a shift in maybe the career field being, more welcoming to folks that are already have other careers, or what was the impetus for this kind of topic?
Josiah, do you want to field that first?
Absolutely. So for better and for worse, there are a lot of resources for entry-level people. Helen wrote an amazing book. That's how I got introduced to her. There are now a surplus of people trying to get entry-level jobs, right? There are a lot of computer science graduates and people with certificates, but who are 18 and 20 and 25 years old. Glad we have them. I'm glad we have figured out that problem. And there didn't seem to be a resource for the people who didn't fall into those sort of characteristics, people who are retiring from the military. Maybe they're 40 years old, maybe they have a family. There's a huge diversity, thank goodness, in our world. And we felt there needs to be a guide for those people. We need them too. There's a lot of companies that we talk to looking for people like that with experience, with maturity. And we felt there wasn't a way to help walk people through that because they're going to self-select out. They're going to say, I'm not a techie, I'm not a hacker. Those aren't jobs for me. And likewise, the hiring managers are going to say, they don't have a PhD in computer science, so I'm not going to look at them. So we were trying to sort of approach it from both angles to say, now is the time for this thing, and we think we can help.
How about you, Helen?
Yeah, so I get into arguments with people at conferences all the time because there will always be some speaker that says there's 500,000 outstanding cybersecurity jobs, and I just wish people would stop this whole talk track. But what I do see that Josiah talked to was we've got a lot at the bottom, but our funnel of people going up through the career is pretty leaky, and so we lose a lot of people. So we need sideways filling in for sure. The other thing I would say is, as a security practitioner who has jumped from industry to industry, the learning curve is not the tech and it's not the tooling that we use in cyber. It's understanding the context of the business we're doing cyber in. And a lot of people who are already in a career in some kind of field that isn't cyber but is in that industry, they bring so much knowledge and contextual understanding of what's going on that really accelerates their ability to move in and then move up. And so, yeah, we needed to be able to reassure people that maybe they don't have hundreds of years worth of cyber. They certainly need to have an affinity for tech because it is a tech profession, but they don't need to have been hands-on keyboard hacking stuff in order to bring value into the profession. So there's that. And I think, though, the weird thing is, as we've tried to bring more people in laterally into cyber, the industry as a whole, I think, has also doubled down on cyber being this technical sort of defense or offense now kind of role. And I think there's a lot of conversation in the industry around, well, are things like governance, risk and compliance, or sales, or those kinds of things, are they cyber or are they cyber adjacent? And so one of the things we talk about in the book is sort of these different personas of people doing cybersecurity, and how do you move through those layers to get to where you want to be in that ecosystem. And I don't think that's fully understood or talked about either. So we get at that.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. It's a big ecosystem, and it's not just people defending enterprise environments or doing offensive security. Like you said, there's sales, there's marketing, there's public relations or partnerships. There's so much involved in this ecosystem beyond just the technical domains. And I feel like I was talking to Josiah about this too offline before we jumped on. And some of the best people, because I've been doing about 20 years myself in government, out of government, industry, et cetera. Some of the best people I've worked with have come from other domains, and they've brought skills like, being a great communicator, being a good storyteller, building relationships, building trust. Maybe they were in marketing, maybe they were in customer service, and they're incredibly patient and can kind of work with a difficult stakeholder of some sort, or get buy-in on a security initiative. So it seems like those things, I think the book touches on this, can be an asset rather than a liability. Some of those, proficiencies you've built in other careers and other domains. I'd be curious to hear from each of you, maybe in your own, because you've been doing this a while too, in your own career, of maybe an anonymized example of someone who came from another career field but ended up being excellent when they came to cyber. Maybe you want to start with that one first, Helen.
Yeah, sure. Multiple examples of this one. I tell people all the time, I actually find people with a music background to be incredibly good at cyber stuff. There's a systems way of thinking about music. There's a pattern recognition piece of music. If you have a security team that's got more than 30 people in it, you've probably got a rock band waiting to go. It may not be any good, but it's probably there. And so, yeah, I find, just as an example, people coming from a music background or a teaching background to be incredibly valid, and not just going from a teaching background to doing security training and awareness, but being in a teaching background and coming into some of the real technical depths of cybersecurity as well. Really important skill. Transfers very well.
Yeah. How about you, Josiah?
Yeah, we talk about these in the book as transferable skills. We'll probably use that phrase a lot, which I think does help, Chris, as you mentioned, like from another domain to say, for example, I have worked in a hospital and I maybe did IT, but I understand that we can't just like shut down the system in ransomware, which, I don't know, we learned all kinds of things in school that just don't translate well to real environments. But those of us who grew up in the tech space, like, we don't appreciate, cybersecurity is not the goal there, right? The goal there is some other thing that we're trying to support, like healthcare and patient safety. And so if you've lived in a hospital and you sort of know this is what the staff here will and will not tolerate, this is what the shareholders will and will not tolerate, that makes you a really good, mature decision maker. That's hard to teach, right? It's hard to teach somebody with a certification to instantly have context and maturity. So I think in those kind of situations, like, that's why that's super valuable.
Yeah, makes sense. I was going to ask you all as well, like, there's this, I feel like we always come up with arguments in cyber, like it must be this or it must be that. One of them is like certification versus education, right? Should you get an education or degree, or should you go, get certifications, as if like you can only do one or the other. I've done both, many examples of both throughout my career. But when you're looking at, say a 40-year-old who's looking to come into cybersecurity, has limited time and resources, how do you advise them to get going? Because it feels like sometimes, and we'll talk about the hiring side of this too, but it feels like a bit gatekeepy in the sense like you must have certification X, Y, and Z, or we won't even speak to you. And as Josiah said, like, those are great. And sometimes they're a great way to learn and develop. But oftentimes, you end up taking them, you're like, I didn't end up using a lot of that stuff later on in my career as well. So when you talk to people who are maybe a little bit older and, finite time resources, they have kids, a family, et cetera, like, how do you kind of advise them to decide between formal education, certifications, maybe a blend of both, or, those kind of things?
Yeah, there is never a one size fits all answer to that question, right? Because you're right, you might be 40 years old with kids and you have no time to go back and do a full degree. So you're going to take a different path. You may be 40 years old and single and you've got all the time in the world, you've got a lot of money and you want to get into cyber, you go do a degree, that's fine. I think Daniel Messler in his unsupervised learning blog a little while ago talked about really understanding what you want to be doing in cyber. When I talk to anybody who's sort of new to the cyber world and they're just sort of curious, they say, I want to work in cyber. And I'm like, well, why? And a college kid will say, I want to hack. A more mature person might say, well, my parents were scammed out of money and I want to make sure. So Daniel's perspective is find out the problem you want to solve. And then if that's the problem you want to solve, then what part of cyber does that point you towards? And go and look at those things. There's always a trade-off. It takes longer to do a cyber degree, but often you get the chance to go and swim around in the concepts for a lot longer. So you might come out with deeper knowledge. You go to a certification, it might be faster, it might be expensive. It may not actually teach you what you want to learn, but it might give you a really good signal to potential employers that you want to do this work, right? So everyone's got to balance those time, cost, what do I actually get out of the concept? I think regardless, going and doing an audit, and I mean that little A audit, not big A audit, an audit of the field and saying, well, what is it I really want to learn? And where might I best go get that? Actually, AI can be really good at helping you narrow down field and some of that stuff. And if you don't even want to pay for it, there's a lot of self-paced learning stuff you can do, but going and looking at the domains that are covered in, say, the CISSP or the Certified Ethical Hacking Program or whatever can show you where you need to do some of your own self-paced learning as well. So there is some benefit from a hiring perspective to have a formal credential, whether that's a certification or a degree, but it's not required, but it can be helpful. So again, you've got to balance those things out.
These things seem really obvious to us in the field because we are immersed and covered in them, and these vendors talk to us all the time. But I think as an outsider, it's very confusing. And so it's not always clear, like, do I need this or which one do I pick even if I want one? The message that I'd like to give people who are not in our field is like, understand that certifications might help you get a job, but they probably won't help you do the job that much. So, I mean, there's that sort of context. Then there's, as Helen mentioned, sort of generic certification, Security Plus and CISSP in breadth, plus very deep, like narrow specialty certifications in forensics or penetration testing or something. So sort of understanding the landscape helps people make better decisions. I think that mid-career professionals sort of overlook what they've already got. So if you have a master's degree or a PhD in some non-technical field, the hiring manager is going to be impressed that you know how to think, you can stick with a program for a long time. If I was the hiring manager, like, that would speak volumes more than, oh, you can do this 1 week class and pass a test. So don't underestimate sort of what you've already got, what you're already doing.
Yeah, you both had so many great points there, and it aligns with the way I think of it is, first off, like the certification, as Helen pointed out, maybe that's like an initial kind of entryway to get your foot in the door, right? And then you could look to get more certifications. You can look to now go to a formal education program. Maybe your employer has, educational assistance of some sort to make it financially feasible. And then to the point of knowing where you want to be in cyber, because there's so many different AppSec, SecOps, GRC, there's so many domains, like, that can help you narrow down what type of certification or what kind of credential should I look into getting. And then she threw out, of course, AI. and I suspect this might come up in my next question, but there's a great opportunity to like use these chatbots, LLMs, and ask all kinds of questions that you may be intimidated to ask in a room full of people that you don't want to seem like you don't know what you're talking about, or you seem like you're ignorant of a certain concept. That the AI is not going to judge you; it will explain it. You can go as deep as you want. There's a great opportunity to use that to kind of learn on the go as well. And that actually was going to be one of the questions I asked you all next. Is I think a lot of this, and I've caught this with people, family members and friends, that when I tell them what I do is this kind of tech intimidation barrier, where they're like, I'm not very technical. I can't do that. That's not where I am. And I think Helen kind of touched on this a little bit, but there's a lot of roles in cyber where you're not down in the bits and bytes, like you're doing other things, or you can build the proficiency in the technology better than you might have thought you could, for example. How do you guys kind of advise or help people navigate that intimidation aspect when it comes to the technology side of cyber?
Yeah. It's sort of interesting to me. I mentor a lot of people who are sort of a level below a CISO role. And even those people who've got 10 years in the industry as cyber people, I deal a lot with people who are like, I feel like I'm an imposter in this space. I don't know enough about technology to be a leader of a technology team, whether that's a cyber team or something else. And so reminding people who are thinking about getting into the program of cyber that no one expects them to know everything is very comforting. But it can be a little bit of a dodgy conversation. I've seen people say to non-cyber people who are thinking of getting in, don't you worry, you don't need to be technical. And there's a little bit of soft paternalism that goes along with that, because I see that being told to women more than men, by the way. But I think cyber is at its core a technical discipline. So yeah, there are roles where you're not hands on keyboard. I certainly haven't had my hands inside a box or in a switch for 20 years now, and I've been doing cyber all that time. But at some point I did have my hands in a box and on a switch and those kinds of things. So helping people sort of decide, is this actually the right career for them? And if they're like, I hate tech, I want nothing to do with it, we're probably not talking to them in the first place. So what part of tech is most interesting to you? A lot of the time, again, with those mid-career folks, they've come into wanting to know more about cyber because there's been some kind of cyber incident in their day job or in their personal life that has made them go, oh, as I'm thinking about next things, this is an interesting path for me. So helping them understand what's the technical implication of that path and what then are the kinds of roles available to them to explore is where that conversation goes quite a bit.
This isn't actually 100% unique to cyber, right? I think everything Helen just said would be true if this conversation was about finance or healthcare or the entertainment industry or basically any, where we have this spotlight effect and we think, oh, I know what banking is. It's the bank on the street, without broadening my psychological aperture to say oh yeah, I bet there's all kinds of other stuff that makes that building function. Certainly the same is here true. And so if we can help illustrate for people, what does a day in the life look like? We wrote that down. What are all these adjacent fields that go into it? Does everybody know how to code? No, that's a misconception. Sure, there's a lot of code in computers. Yes, understanding it a little bit will help kind of every job you do in this field. But do you have to be an expert programmer to do every job? No, of course not.
Yeah, I think we've started to see that, kind of materialize even with the CISOs and senior executives in the field to some extent. And many of them do have a technical background and things like that, but they don't find themselves deep in the weeds of the technical domains many days. They're out there talking to the board, talking to, fellow C-suite peers, trying to quote unquote speak the language of the business, as we hear people say all the time now. So there's many other skills, soft skills and other, things that you need to develop to be effective in this career field. And I did want to make a plug. I've even helped people who are coming in to marketing on the marketing and sales side of cyber, and then they take a kind of an entry level certification just so they can actually speak the language of the field and they can resonate more versus being written off immediately as oh, they're just a marketing person, they don't know anything about cyber or something like that. So I think it all depends on the role, to the point you all have made. And we've talked about the candidates and the folks coming in, and I know this is something we've collectively as a career field vented about quite a bit, but there's the hiring side of this. First off, I'm glad Helen kind of called out the 500,000 openings. I'll say, I won't name any organizations, but those organizations are often incentivized to inflate the figures because they provide credentials that help people get into the field or advance in the field. So they have a bit of a misaligned incentive maybe. But also, like, we all see job descriptions that, 5 years required for an entry-level role, or, X number of years in a technology that's like 2 years old, or whatever the case is. What about the hiring side of this? Because I'm sure, maybe we can't fix that, it's systemic, but we can at least advise and guide folks like, look, this is a known problem. Like, don't let that steer you away, that kind of thing. Well, how do you approach that topic?
In my case, I have always been a proponent actually of networking, because the job descriptions are typically quite poorly written, not always, but quite, to your point. They ask for the wrong things, they're overly broad. They don't give any indication of what the day-to-day tasking would be of the particular job role. So being able to network, not just with the hiring manager of the company that you're looking at, but just sort of the field in general, to say, okay, there's this, to have a resource where you can go and say, there's this job description, here's what they're asking for, but what do they actually mean by it? And how can I position myself to best talk to those things? Again, AI can help with that, but there's no substitute for showing up in person and building those relationships over time. Is going to be really useful. Now, if you're a full-time working adult and I come to you and say, you've got to now spend time building up a network, that can be super frustrating. So the other piece of this is, again, learning enough about the environment or the kinds of jobs that you're looking for to be confident enough that even if there's a job posting that doesn't exactly match your skills, that you feel capable enough to be able to chase that job anyway. Right now, the market's really sludgy for lots of people. So I'm also going to suggest to people who are looking to get into cyber, if they've never held any kind of technical job before, to look for something that is cyber adjacent, but brings you closer to the kind of cyber job you want. Now, in entry-level fields, we talk about things like go work at an IT help desk for a while, and then from the IT help desk, move into then some kind of cyber support kind of role. For a mid-career person, it might be, maybe you're a project manager and you've just done IT projects or non-IT projects. Can you start just doing more work where you focus on the security nature of the projects that you're working on, and then be able to put that into a resume, for example? So again, there's a number of different paths into cyber. You're only limited by your creativity, but networking helps for sure.
I'll point out, we wrote a whole chapter in the book for hiring managers. So the book title might not be obvious that it's for them, but if you are looking, or if you are in this field, hand a copy to your hiring manager. We have thoughts, some of which are already underway, like changing job descriptions to favor competencies over credentials. The big companies of the world are already doing that, right? They're not saying you need a bachelor's degree. They're saying you need these kind of skills. That's great, but it's not everywhere, right? That should be the norm, not the exception. The other is, like, last summer when I was job hunting, it was basically like cybersecurity trivia time. Like, can you answer these fact questions? So that also had not been fixed, right? It wasn't like, tell me how you would address this complicated scenario in the workplace. It was like, all right, what is the way to code this thing in this language? That will turn off people that might otherwise be qualified.
Yeah, agreed. I like the aspect of writing the chapter for the hiring managers, because it's a big part of that. And honestly, like, we talked about the struggles of getting into the field, but organizations have challenges with attraction and retention in terms of talent too. So it's an angle that needs to be addressed. And Helen, I think it was you that brought this up a little bit earlier, but there are so many different fields of, digital forensics. You could be in GRC, SecOps, AppSec, like, the list goes on and on. How do you kind of help orient people to, like, here's some of the kind of domains within cyber, and help them kind of like look around and say, what should I look at, or what may I be interested in? They may be overwhelmed of understanding where to even start or what options they have.
Yeah, for sure. At its most simplistic level, I tell people to go take a look at the CISO mind map that Rafiq Rahman puts together and look at all the things that are in there. And usually that makes their head explode, and then they go away and do some more research on things. The other thing, again, I would go back to what is the problem that you're trying to solve. Sometimes when I talk to mentors, they're like, I don't know what the problem is I'm trying to solve. And then it is, okay, well, maybe what kinds of technologies call to you? Are you interested in networks? Are you interested in mobile devices? Are you more of a website person? Like, how do you, so it's sort of what's the tech that interests you? What's the business process that interests you? Sometimes they're anti-fraud. Sometimes they're about national security. Sometimes they're about identity management, the process, not the tooling. So can you think about the tech you're interested in, the process of that, and the intersection of those things? That might be the place to think about where to start looking for the particular cyber career that you might want to choose. The other thing that we talk about very early in the book is, what kind of company do you want to work for? Because if you go and you work for a startup and you want to do security for a startup, by the nature of it being new and small, you are probably going to be a cyber generalist in that kind of company. That's just sort of the nature of the beast. If you want to specialize in a certain area of compliance or those kinds of things, it's probably going to push you towards a large company that has many cybersecurity people, but they specialize in a certain area. So this concept of being a specialist or a generalist is also something a job seeker needs to think about. And that's going to drive you to a certain kind of company. And that drives you to a certain kind of network, right? So thinking about why cyber, what's the problem you're trying to solve, and what's the environment you want to work in can be three questions that can help people narrow down what is otherwise a very big field.
Also, nothing is perfect.
Right.
You don't have to study this. Like, you can get paralyzed and never make a choice too. So don't think that you shouldn't just start.
Yeah, both those things you all said was awesome. First off, the paralysis by analysis. Maybe you start in AppSec or GRC or whatever, and you pivot, right? You don't like it,
yeah.
or you get a foundation and you use that to go explore something else that you're interested in. And then I love the angle of the dichotomy between a startup versus a larger organization. On one hand, at a startup, you may be doing a lot of different things, which lets you kind of accelerate your learning in a lot of different ways quickly. But at the same time, maybe you don't have a broad team around you that you can lean on and network with. And where in an enterprise environment, maybe they have more resources, a bigger team, people you can collaborate with. So it's kind of pick your poison, or kind of pick your options in that front. Yeah. And I guess my last question to you all, and I'll start with Josiah on this one because I've kind of thrown everything at you first, Helen, is it wouldn't be a conversation in 2026 if we didn't bring up AI. AI is reshaping everything from attack to defense to, the threat landscape and attack vectors and so on. When you look at this, do you think it's going to, especially for mid-career transitioners, does it make transition easier, harder, different? What do you think there, Josiah? Maybe start with you on that one.
I think the answer is pretty obviously different. AI is a tool like many others. It can be used for a lot of things. We've learned that through the whole history of technology. It is sort of value neutral. It's how it is used. Now, should people be afraid that they can't get a job if they're not an AI expert? No. Is it helpful? Of course. It is certainly changing many things, including hiring, right? So trying to weed through the algorithms that are sorting out applicants, that is a real reality. In part because companies are getting so many resumes that they feel underwater and they have to do it. My recommendation to people is to learn a little bit, to try and to play with it, to say, this is what it's good, the kinds of things it's good for and not good for. I could use it in my job for this kind of thing, but not in this other kind of thing. It's going to change a lot. Next year, AI is going to be very different than today. So it's hard to write down in a book that we can't change, let alone to have this conversation where we can update things a little bit. But be ready for that. Like, cyber is a very dynamic environment. If you like jobs that are very stable and never change, this is not for you. AI is a perfect example of that.
Anything to add on that, Helen?
I do think the answer of it's different for mid-career job seekers is true. I actually think the challenge of AI in the cybersecurity workforce right now, it's tending to be eating up entry-level jobs first. And don't get me started, I don't think there's such thing as a cyber entry-level job, but that's for a different podcast on another day. However, the things that junior people used to do, the repetitive work, the research work, that kind of stuff, is the kind of work that AI is gobbling up faster right now. What mid-career people bring, again, is that context. They can ask more intelligent, business-aligned questions. They can discern when AI is being sloppy in certain ways. So there's sort of this question of, how do you use AI to be better at your security job? I actually think mid-career people might, time will tell, might be better than perhaps entry-level resources that have no other sort of business experience. On the other hand, it's just another sort of hurdle that mid-career people feel they have to overcome. But I want to reassure them that everybody is dealing with the weirdness of AI at the moment. They are not special in this regard. So time's going to tell. Time's going to tell on this one. But my sense is mid-career seekers have a leg up when it comes to dealing with AI.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. And I didn't share this, but I've been an adjunct professor for almost 10 years now. But and you guys brought up networking and things like that. One thing I always stress to people is like learn out loud. So get on platforms like LinkedIn, kind of create a portfolio of what you're learning, what you're working on, projects what you're reading. And then networking, it's kind of like, the age old, like, what did they say? It's not what you know, it's who you know. I actually think it's not who you know, it's who knows you. So like getting your name out there, being involved in the community. And just, not being afraid to put your name out there and what you're working on, what you're learning, ask insightful questions and things like that I find really helpful too. So yeah, thank you both so much for jumping on. Again, the book is Switching to Cyber, the Mid-Career Guide to Launching a Cybersecurity Career by Helen and Josiah. And these are two folks that I have followed for a long time and just got the chance to chat with for the first time today. So I really appreciate you both jumping on here and also putting this out there for the community.
Thanks for having us.
Having us.
Absolutely. Take care.